What?
Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and I'm honored to introduce today's conversation about the fate of the world's oceans. Already this year, record high temperatures have been recorded in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. Fish and marine wildlife populations have plummeted, ice cap melt has accelerated, and scientists have predicted a particularly ferocious season of hurricanes, wildfires, and other natural disasters. With so much of the world's attention on the coronavirus pandemic at this perilous moment, we can't afford to lose sight of the fragility of the oceans, an issue that lies at the heart of the climate crisis. For a challenge as far-reaching and as consequential as protecting the world's oceans, the Transatlantic Partnership is critical for everything from mobilizing global conservation efforts to safeguarding vulnerable ecosystems, to strengthening international ocean governance, to coordinating natural disaster responses. To help us think through these efforts and what Europe and America can do together, we're deeply fortunate to be joined by former Secretary of State John Kerry and European Commissioner Virginijus Sinkevičius. I was honored to serve as John Kerry's deputy in the State Department, and I'm honored to be his friend today. No American has done more for diplomacy in recent decades than John Kerry, and no statesman anywhere in the world has done more for the cause of oceans and climate than he has. From the other side of the Atlantic, we're joined by Virginijus Sinkevičius, the European Commissioner for the Environment, Oceans, and Fisheries. Commissioner Sinkevičius is Europe's youngest ever commissioner and one of his generation's most skillful and thoughtful leaders on climate change and the consequences for the world's oceans. And we're fortunate to have Monica Medina moderating this conversation. For more than 3 decades, she has tackled some of the world's most pressing environmental issues, from managing the restoration of the Gulf of Mexico after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill to leading conservation efforts in the Arctic. She's done exceptional work at National Geographic, the Pentagon, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Today, she heads Our Daily Planet, a leading environmental newsletter. So I can't imagine a better group or a more crucial issue. Thank you all for coming. I look forward very much to the conversation. And over to you, Monica.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Burns. It's a pleasure to be here, an honor to be with these distinguished speakers this morning to talk about the fragile state of our world's oceans. And I want to give a special thank you to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace for organizing this important meeting this morning. Welcome, Secretary Kerry and Commissioner Sinkevičius. It's an honor to be with you this morning. And I want to just dive right in because our time is short. So let's start with the topic of biodiversity and increasing ocean protection, something that I know Secretary Kerry is very near and dear to your heart. Many nations around the world have made giant commitments to protect 30% of the planet's ocean and land for biodiversity by 2030. Why? Because nature is disappearing before our very eyes. We've all seen it. And many of us feel a greater connection to nature now as we've emerged from this pandemic-induced quarantines. We've been able to enjoy nature a little bit more, but not experience it as much as we probably would like. A 2019 UN report of global scientific experts concluded that species are going extinct at an alarming rate and an increasing rate, and we could lose as many as 1 million unique species in the coming decades. On top of that, the United Nations is working on conserving large parts of the ocean for species, the parts that are beyond national control. So there's a lot of activity in this area. And next year, the Convention on Biological Diversity will meet and discuss this 30% goal of conservation by 2030. So I want to turn to you, Secretary Kerry, and ask you about how you've been so successful at convincing world leaders and our own leaders here in the US to to protect huge parts of the ocean. We were way behind when you began your term as Secretary of State, but now ocean conservation has caught up. About 7% is protected compared to 15% on land. And when you took over, it was only 2% of the ocean. So you made a huge leap forward. And I'm curious how you were able to persuade President Obama and your counterparts in other nations to step up their expansion and creation of marine parks and protected areas. What were the most persuasive arguments and diplomatic efforts that you used? And finally, how disappointed were you recently when President Trump essentially gutted one of the newest marine protected areas that President Obama created off your home state of Massachusetts? Secretary Kerry, that's to you.
Yeah, I know. I was waiting. Am I unmuted now?
You are.
Hooray! I was muted and I instruction and I kept trying to unmute, but it wouldn't work. So I'm glad that you've included me here. First of all, thanks, Monica. I want to thank you. You've been such an engaged human being, citizen, and leader on this stuff, and we appreciate it. And Bill Burns, thank you for an extraordinary introduction, and thank you for your friendship and your personal leadership of Carnegie, and years of living up to the highest standards of what the Foreign Service is supposed to be. And I'm confident that, after November, depending on what happens, obviously, but hopefully we'll have an opportunity to see you get back to work again. A different kind of work, excuse me. Virginijus, it's great to be with you. You and I met not so long ago when Prince Albert hosted, in fact, we were at the very beginning of the COVID, and Prince Albert, I don't know if he called you, but he called me after our meeting on this very subject to announce that he had coronavirus. So it was a sharp warning of what was to come. Let me go directly to Monica's question. Well, first of all, I don't think President Obama needed massive diplomacy or persuasion. He had the right instincts. He was committed to doing the right thing. He understood the connection between the ocean and climate, and the ocean and life on this planet. But he was very supportive, and we were able to accomplish a lot. He gave me my very long leash to be able to go out and conceivably fail, but we didn't in this case. We managed to persuade President Putin to join us in unlocking 10 years of delay and creating the world's largest single marine protected area, the Ross Sea, the equivalent of about 600,000 square miles of area, the largest on the planet. And I think what we did was we did what the United States normally does. We offered leadership. We stepped up and convened with the first ocean conference in Washington. We brought nations from all over the world together, and we talked about facts, science. We had experts talk to us, and this was a group of people who listened to experts, thank God, which is what we have to get back to. Even in COVID-19 now, we are being reminded of what happens when people don't listen to the experts. And when you play ideology or cheap politics with issues, the world suffers. Oceans are critical to solving climate change, and climate change is critical. The crisis, dealing with it, is essential to saving the oceans. So there are three dramatic impacts right now. One is overfishing. The other is the development and pollution that is going to the ocean all over the planet. And the third is the extraordinary acidification taking place as a consequence of what pollution we're putting up into the atmosphere, which comes back down into the ocean in rain. And so we're doing this to ourselves. And there is one larger impact today, because we are not doing what we set out to do in the Paris Agreement, because no nation on the planet is adequately meeting its obligation to reduce emissions. We are currently racing towards a 3.7 degree, if you don't do what's in Paris, let's say, excuse me, I misstated that. If you did everything that we laid out in the Paris Agreement, you're still at 3.7 degrees, but we're not doing everything. So we're actually heading to 4.1, 4.5 degrees, which means the oceans are now warming at a much faster pace than ever in our history. We are changing the chemistry of the ocean more than we have in 50 million years. And the consequences of this indifference to the reality of science and the reality of how important the ocean is to us is that we're destroying biodiversity, and we're living in a world where when about 75% of the planet is in this high seas area, there are no laws. There's no restraint. There's no ability to enforce. So we have set out a great band of warriors, including particularly the Pew Foundation, the Bertarelli Foundation, the aquarium out in Monterey, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and others are all part of this massive effort to try to get people to realize to protect biodiversity, you've got to protect large chunks of the ocean. And the big goal right now is what's called 30-30. We want 30% by 2030 to be marine protected area. Today, we're actually only at about 2.7% of genuinely protected. And while we've had nations declare that they're protecting certain areas, the fact is it's not enforced, and therefore it is abused. And we see the pollution, the overfishing, the other problems still growing. So why is this important to us? Because the oceans, and I'll end on this, the oceans are the thermometer of the planet. They're the regulator, the governor, if you will, of climate, of temperature. And the oceans produce 51% of the oxygen that we breathe. So life itself on this planet, protein that we eat, the circulation of the ecology of the ocean, the biodiversity of the ocean, and ultimately the temperature of the ocean and the cycle of the currents are essential to our capacity to preserve life and preserve a future. So there couldn't be a more important issue, and I'm delighted that Carnegie is leading the charge to discuss it here today.
Thank you, Secretary Kerry. I wanted to just follow up with one quick question about your concern about the marine protected area off the coast of Massachusetts. That's one that President Trump recently opened up to fishing. And I just wonder if you have any comments about that one, because it is such an important one. It was the first one in the Atlantic. And of course, we hope to have even more transatlantic marine protected areas.
Well, it's a terrible, senseless decision with respect to science and with respect to the commitment to biodiversity and to marine protected areas. It makes no sense. It's like pulling out of the Paris Agreement. He's the only president in the world who has made the decision to pull out. And governors all across the country, including Republican governors in 38 of our states out of the 50, are all committed to keeping Paris. They're actually moving through renewable portfolio laws to get there. So it's moving in the wrong direction. It's a terrible signal. We were not fishing it. We haven't been fishing it for quite a while. It's not a question of jobs, as he said. It's really an ideological move that he made. And it's going to cost us in the long term, unless, of course, we have a president who reinstates it and we actually codify it. That's what we need to do with all of these marine protected areas. We've been able to do many of them by executive order, but we need to get them not only in statute form for countries like ours that control that particular one, but through the United Nations, through the global community. And that's why this treaty that everyone is working on to control, to protect the high seas, which is now a postponed meeting because of COVID. We're looking at it taking place next year. that will be one of the critical meetings of the intergovernmental process of the United Nations, where new leadership is going to be critical to the ability of the world to fulfill the mandate of multilateral concern on this issue.
Yes, agreed. It's very important. And I want to ask you about that, Commissioner Sinkevičius. The EU has recently already committed to the 30 by 30 goal within its own land and sea borders, and that's going to fall a lot on you to help to deliver. I'm wondering how you will persuade other nations to join you in this quest to save 30% of the planet by 2030. Do you think you can replicate this race to the top that Secretary Kerry has started in our ocean conferences and the great level of protection that's increased over the last 6 years? And what other initiatives, for example, the areas beyond national jurisdiction negotiation that Secretary Kerry referenced, what other initiatives do you see as key to being able to achieve that very challenging goal?
Thank you very much. And first of all, of course, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Medina, Secretary Kerry, Ambassador Burns, a very good afternoon from Brussels, but a good morning to United States. And I trust that you are all well. And I'm truly pleased to join you today to talk about one of the key challenges of this century, the health of our oceans. And the ocean is clearly under pressure from all sides. It is suffering from the impacts of climate change. It is being polluted from the sea as well as from land. Far too many marine resources are still being overexploited, and we will have to ensure that the projected increase of maritime activities does not harm our ocean further. In the EU, we have reformed our common fisheries policy with sustainability at its core, and we have set robust rules to tackle marine litter, in particular plastics. And we have laid down the EU's roadmap to sustainable and carbon neutral growth in the European Green Deal. In that context, we have very recently committed, as you've noted in your question, to protect at least 30% of marine areas in the EU by a network of well-connected and ecologically representative areas. But these measures can't be seen in isolation. To conserve at least 10% of coastal and marine areas in line with the Agenda 2030 is an endeavor that requires cooperation across the globe. And when the EU and the US work together, we can achieve great things. And Secretary Kerry, you started our ocean conferences, and we built on that in 2017 in Malta to turn them into the world's foremost forum for ocean matters. And these conferences have delivered on millions of square meters of marine protected areas and on billions of euros of investment promises in ocean conservation and sustainability. And I'm very grateful that we had a very good meeting in Monaco to discuss how we can continue on this path. And we can truly be proud of these successes. But the next challenge is the governance of international waters. The seas that lay beyond the national jurisdiction of states, but that belong to all of us. And scientists, they send us very clear signal. They tell us that we are approaching a tipping point for the state of the ocean, even a point of no return. We need to have the courage to listen to science and make immediate game-changing decisions. And in that context, I see 3 decisive moments coming up soon. First, the annual meeting of the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, CAMELA, so-called, in the next October. The meeting will decide on 3 proposals to create marine protected areas in the Southern Ocean, 2 of which are sponsored by the EU and its member states. The areas under discussion together span more than 3.2 million square kilometers of ocean space, more than double that of the Ross Sea proposal adopted in 2016. Secondly, the 15th Conference of Parties under the Convention on Biodiversity next year, where I hope to see adopted an ambitious post-2020 global framework, including, of course, a 30% goal of marine protected areas. We are reaching out to as many countries as possible to support this ambition, and we listen attentively to their views and their concerns, be they on capacity building and technology transfer or benefit sharing on marine genetic resources. Third, last but not least, in early next year, we will hopefully conclude discussions that have started over a decade ago at the UN on how we should tackle the challenge of dealing with biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction, or so-called BBNJ. It is time to speed up and conclude these negotiations and come to an ambitious and balanced binding international treaty. Through this treaty, the global community would be able to take collective action to conserve and sustainably use the high seas by identifying and establishing high seas areas that require protection, by assessing activities planned in the high seas to see if they cause harm to the environment, and to look at the impact of all human activities. What else? By working together on science and research to unlock the potential of marine genetic resources that could be the next revolution for food, energy, and what's now matter number one, health. And finally, by making sure that all countries, including developing countries, have an active role and benefit from these new rules.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Sinkevičius. That is so true about the BBNJ negotiation and all of the bounty that there still remains in the ocean, but we have to sustainably conserve it. Thank you so much for all your efforts on that. I want to turn now to a very difficult topic, I think, because it's very timely because of some actions recently in the South China Sea. I want to talk about China and their role in the oceans. China is the third largest emitter of carbon in the world, and we know that oceans are the world's largest carbon sink. They absorb 2.6 billion tons of carbon a year, and that's roughly 30% of all the world's carbon pollution. And that number is also increasing. China has the world's largest distant water fishing fleet. It's driven the shark finning trade that's so abhorrent to devastate shark populations and tuna populations worldwide. And their wildlife markets, their wet markets, have fueled crime, wildlife trafficking, and human rights violations that have happened as a result of their lack of regulation of these things. And on top of all that, we're now in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and other pandemics like this could result from unsustainable wildlife markets in places like China. And China just recently has destabilized the South China Sea, and the Trump administration has taken action denouncing that. So I'm wondering what you all think. This is a question for both of you. Given this record by China, how would you urge your nations, the US and the EU, to hold China accountable? What specific actions would you take, and would you like to see your nations take, to get China to address their illegal fishing activities, their increasing carbon emissions, and their illegal wildlife markets? Because as we've seen, our food security, our future, and our very lives may depend on it. So I'll ask you, Commissioner Sinkevičius, to take this one first. It looks like you're still muted. So let's jump to, there you go.
Yes, now it's good. Host didn't allow me to unmute myself, but now I managed. Thank you very much. And thank you for your question. Yes, the question is not easy. Probably to begin with, the European Union and China are linked by an enduring relationship. Together with the United States, we are the three largest economies and traders in the world, and over the last decade, China's economic power and political influence have grown with unprecedented scale and speed, reflecting its ambitions to become a leading global power. And we can no longer regard China as a developing country. That's one. Secondly, it has become a key global actor and leading technological power, and we have witnessed an increasing presence in the world, including here in Europe. And the thinking in Europe is that this role should be accompanied by greater responsibilities for upholding the rules-based international order, as well as greater reciprocity, non-discrimination, and openness of its system. Under the Green Deal, the EU has clearly defined international interests and principles for a sustainable and carbon-free future. And we have been deepening our engagement with China to promote common interests at global level. The 2030 agenda that both China and the EU have committed to present opportunities for closer dialogue and cooperation. A sustainable future would also be in China's interest, certainly for China's younger generation. Let's look at on carbon emission. There is no doubt that representing 27% of global emissions, a commitment by China to peak its emissions before 2030 would give new impetus to fighting climate change in line with the Paris Agreement and would inspire action globally. With China hosting the COP15, which I've mentioned in my previous statement, under the CBD, next year, China would have every interest to ensure an ambitious outcome on biodiversity, accompanied by key commitments. And already the EU and China are strengthening cooperation on sustainable finance to channel private capital flows towards a more sustainable and climate neutral economy in China. 2 years ago, the EU and China signed an ocean partnership to work together to improve the international governance of the oceans in all its aspects, including by combating illegal fishing and promoting a sustainable blue economy. And I can say that we see first positive results with China's recent overhaul of its new fisheries law, taking a stronger stance on IUU fishing, illegal unreported fishing activities, but this is only the start. We will continue to exchange with China. First of all, on initiatives aiming at eliminating IUU fishing activities in international fora, and of course, secondly, on the implementation of the EU catch certification scheme and information exchanges on alleged and confirmed IUU fishing activities. We'll also continue to work with China with a prospect on positive outcome for Antarctic MPAs this year, as well as for an ambitious BBNJ agreement. And we also hope to agree on the elimination of harmful fishery subsidies through the WTO, World Trade Organization negotiations.
Thank you, Commissioner. Secretary Kerry, you've been particularly successful working with the Chinese to raise their ambitions. I'm curious what you think of the state of China's engagement in the ocean and how we could work to curb some of their less desirable activities.
Well, Monica, let me begin by saying that China, managing the China relationship is clearly one of the very top priorities in a small group of top priorities. We have nuclear challenges, cyber challenges, Iran, so forth. But managing the China relationship is absolutely critical to the future of relationships across the board on this planet. China has changed over these last years, and unfortunately, our relationship in this current administration has been very troubled and gotten worse. We passed the TPP. You can find fault with parts of the TPP. People had a legitimate reason to say, I don't like the TPP, I want to change it. That's fine. But to simply walk away from it at a time where we had enormous investment in building relationships to achieve it, and to try to change the rules of business and trade in the region, was to give away to China the store. And I remember China saying to me, I'm sure they said to Bill Burns and others, hey, could we join this thing sometime? How do we get into the TPP? And there was a great ability to be able to have a very different set of choices in front of us. Regrettably, the current administration gave proof to the reality it doesn't really do real diplomacy. It issues edicts. It gives people ultimatums. It starts a trade war without even going through the efforts to bring Japan, Korea, the TPP countries, Australia, North America, Mexico, Canada, with whom they immediately picked fights instead of creating a momentum to then join Europe in saying to the Chinese, first privately, hey guys, you cannot continue to steal our technology. You cannot continue to force countries to give it up to you as a matter of doing business. You can't continue to shut us out and be a legitimate member of the WTO. Now, that is a confrontation that's been waiting to happen, but how you do it is absolutely critical to what you can get done. And no country reacts positively to ultimatums, particularly when they're looking at our country and making judgments about us that are not particularly flattering. When is the last time America passed a budget? When is the last time we have stepped up in unity to say we're together in this kind of a policy for overseas, et cetera? Which is why President Xi and President Putin are now running around the world with a new narrative. And their narrative is the United States of America is in decline. See, they can't make decisions. They're gridlocked. Their politics is screwed up. They're not able to be a legitimate player at the United Nations. They choose not to. And so all of that has got to change in order to deal with China. Now, I have no illusions about how tough negotiations can be and are with China, but I also know that if you approach them in a responsible adult way and you engage in legitimate diplomacy, China is a very smart country. They can see what the interests of the world are. These leaders are leaders who have, on a daily basis made big decisions. And in the Obama-Biden administration, we were able to work with them so that we could define common interests. And using that definition of common interests, we were able to get them to do things jointly with us that were enormously important. China was a critical player to getting the Iran nuclear agreement. China was a critical player in these ocean issues we've just talked about. China played a very important role in helping to make the Paris Agreement happen. We went over to China early, talked to China, we defined the mutual interest. President Obama and President Xi were able a year later to stand up together in Beijing and announce the mutual reductions of our countries. And that is what actually created the Paris Agreement. So if we can get back to legitimate diplomacy, if we get back to the legitimate leadership status and position of the United States of America, if we can once again establish credibility on these issues, I believe we can find a way to resolve and to make progress with some of these issues on the oceans, on biodiversity, on nuclear, on cyber, on and particularly on climate, the climate crisis. China understands where its own self-interest lies, and its self-interest does not lie in having a climate crisis on a global basis with the instability that will come with it.
I agree wholeheartedly with both of you. I think it's wise to think about engaging China because they seem to be at the center of every one of the crises that we are confronting right now. I want to turn now to the blue economy and what I consider, I think, will be the blue ocean century, the 21st century. a group of ocean leaders last year at the UN conference issued a report that if we expanded our economy into the blue, we could also help solve our climate problems. And a new report out last week calculated that if we conserve that 30% of the ocean, we would average an increase of $250 billion in economic output globally each year. Indeed, nature conservation as a sector has been one of the fastest growing parts of our economy, according to that report. And it's expected to continue to grow at 4 to 6% per year compared with extractive activities like agriculture or fisheries. But we need, as Commissioner Sinkevičius referenced, we need those rare earth minerals that are found in the ocean to create batteries. And we may need to farm fish in the ocean in order to feed a fast growing population. And we need ocean space to do offshore wind, which Europe has excelled at so far, and even potentially solar power offshore. And there are new issues about equity and how to share the wealth of the ocean with all of the nations of the world. So Commissioner Sinkevičius, I'd like to ask you, as you're part of this millennial generation who will live in this ocean century, how you want to transform the EU with your green, and now I would submit your blue deal policies. Your fisheries management policies, as you've alluded to, are some of the best in the world. How do you see your role as the EU Environment and Oceans and Fisheries Minister to balance the sustainability of the oceans with the need for the use of these ocean resources in this blue century?
Thank you for your question. And absolutely, I've been asked quite often about, EU announced the Green Deal, but where is that blue part? And I always say that without blue, that's not possible. Without blue, green is yellow. And we're not reaching for that. We're going for full solid green. And yes, because many of the solutions to transform our economy to carbon neutrality will come actually from the oceans. That transition is not possible without them. Europe's blue economy already has played a crucial role in supporting, first of all, coastal communities, and of course, in decarbonizing our economy. And it can also offer opportunities in the European Union's road to recovery. And this is why I've been tasked with developing a new approach for a sustainable blue economy for this decade. It will bring together everything from marine knowledge and research to maritime spatial planning, marine renewable energy, blue investment, and most importantly, regional maritime cooperation. Take, for example, the offshore energy transition. It has already commenced, but it is not moving fast enough. Offshore wind capacity will need to increase 5-fold by 2030 to meet our current decarbonization targets. By 2050, up to 35% of our electricity consumption may come from offshore renewables, be it wind, wave, or tidal energy. We absolutely need to achieve that goal. Fish will continue to be an important part of the European diets, and continued efforts on fisheries management in the EU have brought good news. In the Northeast Atlantic, we now have 50% more fish than in 2003. And the economic performance, what's most important, of the EU fleet continues to be very good, with a net profit of around 1.4 billion euros and an average net profit margin of 18% in 2018. Of course, the effects of the enduring pandemic continue, and the outlook for the sector is highly uncertain, but we will continue to support recovery, as well as, importantly, make the sector more resilient to future crises. What blue economy sectors need are enabling actions to grow. For example, we will need sufficient financing to renovate and adopt port facilities, build new infrastructure, and expand supply chain services. And this requires massive investments from private and public sources. The European Commission is fully on board here. In our proposal for our research and innovation program, so-called Horizon Europe, we reserve 35 billion euros for climate change related research. And at the start of this year, we'll launch together with the European Investment Bank a new 75 billion euro equity fund for the blue economy. But sustainable growth can only be achieved within the boundaries of our planet. And that's why we will continue to uphold our strict environmental rules to restore the health of our marine waters, aiming to protect biodiversity and tackling pressures like overfishing, seabed damage, marine litter, and contaminants. But most importantly, what I wanted to highlight here, that we have a great example where we manage to balance social, economic, and most importantly, sustainability and protection of our sea basins with a great profitability of our fishing fleets in Northeast Atlantic.
Thank you, Commissioner. I really appreciate that and know how much activity you have going on. Secretary Kerry, give me 1 second to just prompt the audience to send us your questions now. We're interested in hearing what you would like to ask these two wonderful speakers. So please go ahead and text your questions in and we'll sift and sort them in the next couple of minutes. So Secretary Kerry, to you, how would you balance these two important considerations, conserving these fragile oceans and yet needing to develop some of their resources?
Well, I balance them by actually balancing them, but today we're not. I mean, the reality is that I'm for a blue economy. I think most people want a blue economy, but we're living in a world where there's already too much money chasing too few fish. We have illegal fleets out on the high seas today. I'm not going to name the countries at this moment, but everybody knows who they are. And they send these big, factory ships out, or fleets people go out, and they are fishing illegally and in unreported fashion in many parts of the world. The major fisheries of the world, about 8 of them are overfished, and the rest, it's in the double digits, around 18 of them, I guess, are at or near peak. So, 450 million Chinese have come in from poverty to urban life. There's a new middle class in China, a new middle class in India. They have discovered blue tuna. They love sushi. And I got news for you. They're going to disappear at the rate that the current demand is being met. Too much money chasing too few fish. So the biodiversity component of this is absolutely critical. If you don't recognize an ecosystem, it's a system in which each species plays its role. And if you start altering that, as we have with predatory fish, with sharks, about 100 million sharks a year being fished, mostly for fins, for this mythology about sexual prowess that comes with shark fin soup. I mean, this is craziness. And so these are the kinds of things we're going to have to confront in a major way. No country in the world is living sustainably with respect to these kinds of choices right now. And on the high seas, without a high seas set of rules that people are going to follow, we currently are living in a world where there is murder, rape, hijacking of ships, piracy. You have slavery, gun running, narcotics trafficking. I mean, a whole bunch of evil things happening that we don't want, and we try to prevent on land in most places, but we have no jurisdiction. We have no laws. We have no enforcement of much of that. And there's a reporter for the New York Times named Ian Urbina, he's left the New York Times now, who wrote a brilliant series called Outlaw Ocean, which chronicles this lawlessness. I mean, slavery, there was a young Cambodian kid who spent 2 years at sea with a shackle and chain around his neck until he finally escaped, impressed as labor on a small vessel to go out and do fishing, illegal fishing. So we passed a port state measures, which can measure more effectively where fish are coming from when they come into port. There are ways to, we've made some progress with respect to controlling the fish that go out to the marketplace and where they come from in restaurants. A lot of restaurants now print on the menu where their fish come from or that they are sustainable. But we simply have not stepped up as a global community to do what's necessary to guarantee that future generations will have a protected 30%. And I congratulate all those who made, Canada recently came on board saying they're going to do 30%, et cetera. But I'm telling you, I don't mean to be the scold at the party, but the fact is we just don't have the enforcement necessary. And there's only 1% that actually has no take, means nothing. You can't take any fish out. There's no fishing, there's no trafficking and so forth. So we have a long ways to go here, and it's going to take massive leadership. I believe China and the United States are the key to solving that. I think China and the United States are key to dealing with climate change. And we have to recognize that all of the big global problems we face, including pandemics, COVID, et cetera, it's going to only be resolved on a global basis by major diplomatic initiative. We have got to step up. We were doing that under the Obama administration. Hasn't happened under this administration. And I think it's critical for our country and our future that we get back to basics.
Yes, agreed. And these are global problems, and we will need to work together to find global solutions. And the technology is increasingly there. So I'm optimistic if we can finally work together, we can solve some of the problems out there in those areas that are beyond national jurisdictions. So we have Absolutely. A couple of questions. Yes, we have a couple of questions from the audience. I want to thank Olivia on YouTube for sending us this one. She asks, are you worried at all about the potential impact of deep sea extraction of minerals, the minerals necessary for renewable energy and digitalization transition on marine ecosystems? I know you mentioned this, Commissioner Sinkevičius. Secretary Kerry, are you worried about deep seabed mining and the race to get to these minerals?
Yes, I am worried about it. I'm not somebody who suggests that we can't mine appropriately, intelligently, sensitively, where we have to, and we're going to. There are rare earth minerals that we need, but we cannot let it be a free-for-all, savage race, every nation for itself. We've already seen Russia dropping a flag under the North Pole. They were sending a signal. I know because I chaired the Arctic Council for a couple of years. We worked very closely with Russia. We got a lot done, but that's sort of a completely non-existent constructive relationship today. And so we're going to have to really work at trying to get the rules in place that will protect the ocean bed. If it is a free-for-all, it's going to be absolutely calamitous, disastrous for species and for the sustainability of the oceans. But I think if we can come together, as we must, and give back respect to international institutions, they're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. And there, you can find complaints if you want to. But this notion of one country first ahead of all else at the expense of multilateral initiatives is extremely costly to the issue of sustainability, to the fight against poverty, to our ability to manage disease, to all the things that common sense tells us. If you didn't have a UN, you'd have to invent it.
Yes, indeed. And I want to ask you, Commissioner Sinkevičius, about the UN and its Deep Seabed Mining Authority and your and the BBNJ negotiations and the issues of sharing of the benefits of those resources that are mined from the deep sea, from the open ocean, the part that's beyond national jurisdictions. Are you confident, as someone who's in the younger generation who didn't come up with these institutions but now is dependent on them, are you confident that they can rise to the occasion, that the Deep Seabed Mine Authority can come up with the right rules that will protect us from over-exploitation, and yet ensure that we have these minerals that we need in order to develop our non-fossil fuel dependent energy systems?
To begin with, it's to address this question, because there was a twin question. The second part was on digitalization, and I will try to address it as well. But first, it's very clear. We have EU-funded research projects, as well as others, that show very clearly recovery of the seabed from direct mining impacts is likely to occur only in the very long term, if at all. So considering the limited scientific knowledge and the concerns about the inevitable and likely irreversible impacts on biodiversity and climate, the exploitation of mineral resources should only start once the effects of deep sea mining on the marine environment, biodiversity, and human activities at sea have been studied and researched sufficiently. And all possible risks are very well understood. Technologies and operational practices will need to be able to demonstrate no serious harm to the environment in line with the precautionary principle before anything happens. And speaking about enforcement, this is what Secretary Kerry just said in a couple minutes ago. Enforcement is really dragging its feet behind at the moment, and there is definitely so much scope for us to step in, but we only can do it if we act together, if we find a common agreement. And this is why I named numerous of initiatives, of roundtables where there is a possibility to protect enormous spaces and square kilometers of our oceans. Now, speaking about the digitalization as itself, as the process, I wouldn't be afraid of it if it used in a smart way. It can also help us actually to enforce. For example, at the moment, there is probably around 70,000 vessels out there fishing. And there is no chance for us to know for sure what sort of fish, what are they landing, and are they complying with the rules or not. I'm happy that here in the EU, those protected areas, we can monitor some vessels, but out there in the whole ocean, not. And with the digital processes, with the artificial intelligence moving forward, if we use it smartly, if we apply circular economy principles, that can only help us.
Agreed. And the potential is there, and now we just have to use it. We have to work together to deploy it. So true. We are running short on time. I have time for one more question from the audience, and this one has to do with aquaculture, fish farming in the ocean. I wonder if each of you could very briefly comment on what you think of the potential for that and how to do it in a way that is sustainable and not to overdo it or overexploit ocean space in fish farming. Secretary Kerry.
Well, it is doable, but it requires real knowledge of what the impacts are in terms of pollution, making it in fact sustainable. And we don't know completely what the impacts are of certain species escaping and farm fish versus wild fish. People are concerned about some aspects of that. But can you create a capacity, an environment within which, with netting and with proper turnover and so forth, that you could actually do this, providing it's done within the confines of what is actually sustainable? The answer is yes, but you're going to have to do a lot of work yet in certain things to make sure you understand the sustainability. I mean, I have friends who are tending to oyster beds in Massachusetts now, clams in Europe, same thing. France and many places, they're huge oyster business, growing them using the ocean, farms that are very effective. And there are pretty strong regulations, and Virginijus is in charge of making sure that those are going to be there, and he knows full well what I'm talking about. They've done a very good job in managing fisheries in many of the countries in Europe, and they're well known for it. Norway and Denmark, the Scandinavian countries, Ireland, others have really stepped up, and there are some that haven't done as well, but that's Virginijus's headache. The bottom line is know your science, listen to the experts, make sure that you are not so greedy that you're getting ahead of yourself in terms of what actually meets the standard of sustainability. The bottom line.
Yes, Commissioner Sinkevičius, I guess you will inherit this problem. How do you in Europe think you can balance the need to develop aquaculture and to do it with the precautionary principle in mind?
Of course. So first of all, I'm really proud that standards of food safety, first of all, and in EU we have probably one of the highest in the world, and we can be truly proud of it. And it's carefully monitored and assessed from farm to fork, basically. And of course, we work hard to reduce risks, to promote sustainability, and most importantly is, of course, by monitoring, then ensure food safety and quality. What are the next steps for us to be planned? So first of all, we revising Commission strategic guidelines for sustainable development of EU aquaculture. So the new strategic guidelines will be the basis for a coordinated strategic approach between the Commission and the member states for the coming years, and they will further promote the sustainable development and competitiveness of European Union aquaculture and its contribution to economic activity and employment in coastal and inland areas. So efforts to expand the sector often face opposition, due to concerns regarding its environmental impact or potential conflict to other activities. But at the same time, the positive role that sustainable aquaculture can play is not always recognized, I think, and properly valued. So, as recognized in the Green Deal, and more specifically in our new farm to fork strategy, sustainable aquaculture can make huge and important contribution to the transition to sustainable food systems, and most importantly, as low carbon source of food and feed.
Can I mention one thing, Monica?
Yes, go ahead. We are down to the last couple minutes, but go ahead, please.
Just in the work that we've been doing with the Pew Foundation and Bertarelli and the Monterey Bay and so forth, we started something in Vietnam called the Lower Mekong Initiative. And we've been working with the farmers there. There are a massive number of shrimp farms in the Mekong. And we're bringing them up to the highest standards. That's our goal, is to bring 20,000 of these fish farms up to the sustainable standards, so that you're not damaging your own home, your own backyard, so to speak, and at the same time providing sustainable fishery. So if you work at it, there's the promise of possibilities there.
That is a very positive note. I want to give you, Commissioner Sinkevičius, one last chance to give us your pump-up speech. Why should we be optimistic about this ocean century ahead?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, because I was afraid. So, first of all, I think we have seen great environmental challenges in recent decades as well, and that we managed to overcome, actually. So from the hole in the ozone layer that we have managed to curtail, to putting a stop to acid rain. Nobody talks about these issues anymore, and they seem to have been wiped from our minds and our agendas, and that's great. But most importantly, they show that humans have an amazing sense of ingenuity to come to solutions when the situation requires. And I see the same for our oceans. If we, the global community, put our mind to it, we can achieve anything. Yes, it will require a vision and a political will. Yes, it will require extremely hard work, but we have all the tools and resources at our disposal to make the game-changing decisions that can alter the course of history. And most importantly, we can be cooperating and guided by the great leaders who already did a great job, like Secretary Kerry. I'm truly happy in our friendship and continued partnership. So hopefully that Europe and United States here unites and plays as a one team for our oceans.
One team for our oceans. That's a great message on which to end this. I want to thank you both for your tremendous leadership in this regard. And I want to thank the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace for bringing us together to talk about this important topic. And I wish we could see everyone who's out there and appreciate the fact that you were all there to join us. And I know that if we were watching the English Premier League now, they would be piping in the audience's thunderous applause for this incredible panel today. Thank you both. And please be well and take good care during these difficult times with the coronavirus still out there. And thank you again. And thanks to the Carnegie Endowment for this wonderful panel.